Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions, and this one kind of a throwback to a subject I talked about a couple of years back. It was one of my more popular videos, in fact. So back in early 2016, I talked about a video known as Gnomes in America. Even then, I kind of debated about putting it whether in the urban legends or in this case the cryptids and monsters side. And back then, I put it on the urban legends because I thought it would more, I guess, encapsulate like a broader theme. In this case, multiple gnomes throughout different parts of America. Here, though, someone suggested, in this case, a actual set of gnomes at a very specific spot. In fact, when I was looking at the information, I was amazed at how many encounters there have been there and the rich details associated with them. So, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and include them on the cryptid side because, yes, if you go to this spot, you have a very good chance of running into these very specific gnomes. So, and it has to do with this. You're looking at them now. It's known as the mysterious gnomes of Wollaton Park. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info associated with these gnomes and very specifically how you can encounter them there. That's what I love about doing these videos. It's about the chance of going to these locations and then having a very good probability of seeing something like this. So what are these mystery gnomes of Wollaton Park? Well, you have to go specifically to Wollaton Park, located there in Nottingham, England. In fact, at that area, that's where there's a castle that was used in the latest Dark Knight film, The Dark Knight Rises, the last one essentially in the trilogy. So if this castle looks familiar to you, those of you who've seen the movie, this is the one that was used within the film itself. It's a beautiful looking place, but more specifically, we're going to talk about the areas surrounding the castle. In particular, those being some of the swampland areas and then some of the other foresty areas, because that's where these things, these gnomes, seem to be encountered. And this all happened, you have to go back, at least the main case, back to 1979, October 29th, to be specific. But there are also various other encounters afterward, which I'll highlight too. That's what makes it so amazing to me when I was reading all of this. One encounter is great. Two encounters, even better. But in this case, having like at least 5 encounters or so that I was reading, and some of them as current as 2016, it amazes me. You guys and gals that are over there by that area, if you go there to this day, then you'll have a very good chance of running into these unique creatures, and you are very lucky to do so. I would gladly go to this location if I had an opportunity, so that way I could try to run into them myself. So here's what occurred on that fateful day. Again, October 29th, 1979, there at Wollaton Park. So there was a group of 6 school children, all of young ages, boys and girls who happened to be in that location wandering around the castle. I don't know exactly what they were doing there. Maybe they're on a school trip. Maybe there's an actual school there itself. Someone please, if you know the further details on it, point it out in the comments below. But the thing is, they were playing around those locations, and as it was getting towards the late afternoon, that's when they realized, they saw the sun starting to dim downward, that it was time to go home, time to go back to wherever it was the rest of the school was. And so as they were doing so, they came across a fenced area near an overgrown swampland by the lake. And in fact, here's a picture of it here. So I don't know the exact location of it, but these school children happened to see that fenced area, and the article I was reading was right. Anytime you see something like that, you see like a curious looking place, it's fenced off, directions, signs saying don't go over there. What do? Obviously, the kids decided, let's go over there. And so they did so, and they happened to walk across that area just maybe to see, what it's about. So not necessarily to try to do anything bad or do anything mischievous. It's just mainly to just try to see what the location contains. And when they did so, they soon heard a very distinctive sound. This actually plays across other encounters too. So be sure to remember this here in a minute. They heard what sounded like a bell, like the chime of a bell, something coming across the nearby location. And when they went across some crossing, I don't know if it was like an open field. That's how it read to me when I was when I was going over and glancing over this information, lo and behold, they go across these shrubs and across that open field. They were aghast with seeing this. Apparently, there were about 60, no less than 60, several dozen in this case, short, tiny men who, for all intents and purposes, looked like your stereotypical gnome, like straight out of some kind of fable. It's the shorter men with the white beards. They had these reddish hats on them too. They all looked old, like in other words, they had these deeply wrinkled faces. And most interestingly enough, they were riding around in these cars, these tiny, cute little cars. So your classic gnomes, such as the ones seen in cartoons, such as the ones seen in stories, even in some movies, for example, down to the, in this case, the green tights and the blue shirts, others containing yellow clothing, all of them looked like they were pulled out straight out of one of those stories. And there they were, these tiny little men running around, in this case, with these bubble-like cars. The children, for all intents and purposes, called them miniature bubble-like cars with no steering wheels. In fact, you're looking at a representation of it here. One of the children, in fact, drew it themselves, and you can see what they saw. Fascinating, no? I mean, when you have, in this case, one child seeing this, great. But two children and up to six, all of them seeing it all at once, it's amazing, utterly amazing that they could all witness this and be able to tell the truth, like they're not lying to anybody. So they saw these cute little gnomes riding around in these bubble-like cars with no steering wheels, apparently something just basically pushing these cars forward, because they weren't producing any kind of engine sounds, but they were definitely moving at a high speed. And the children stated that they were just in the jolliest mood ever. These tiny little gnomes, it was almost like bumper cars, the way I was reading it, like the joy that one has whenever they're just moving, colliding with each other, zipping around left and right. And in certain areas, they were actually circling the children themselves. Like they weren't hitting the children. In fact, they were clear to avoid doing so. And that ties into other things too here in a minute as far as the danger of these gnomes. But that they were there just zipping around the children, gleefully, joyously laughing, almost like they were chasing the children and vice versa, and almost seemed to encouraging the children to do so. These children obviously were just amazed at what was happening around them. In fact, here's one of the quotes, one of the witnesses from the children. They said, "We heard this little tinkly bell. We started running, and these little men came out of the bushes. There were about 60 of them in 30 cars that were like bubble cars. They were half my size." Remember, we're talking about children, so imagine half the size of children. And they looked old. They had these greenish faces with crinkles on them, and then these long white beards with a bit of red just on the end of them. And they were laughing in a funny way and driving over swamps near the lake. And we were frightened and ran to the gate. I don't think they liked the lights outside because they didn't follow us to the street. So these tiny little gnomes are having the greatest time of their lives, just laughing left and right and then just zipping around. Still, it must have been a startling image to the children. And they stayed for a little bit, about 15 minutes at most, but then they realized that truly at that point, it was becoming nightfall. They had to get home. So they left that weird, surreal area there consisting of these tiny gnomes. They went back to their home, and of course, what did they do? They told the adults everything that they saw, and nobody believed them. Why would they? I mean, would you believe somebody telling you this? 60 tiny little gnomes just riding around in these bubble-like cars, just having the time of their lives. It's something that the adults clearly would just simply just consider it just playful imagination. Eventually, though, one of the adults started to look further into it because, again, you have one child saying it, two children, but in this case, six, all of them corroborating the same information one after the other. In fact, here's what the adult would say afterward when he was taping their conversations. He said, "I think the tape reveals the wide measure of corroboration between the children, as well as the fluency with which they were able to describe the events. I still remain skeptical as to the explanation of what they saw, but I'm also convinced that the children were describing a real occurrence." There is that thought about groupthink. If you've heard of that, that does come into play here. The idea that a lot of times people will just agree with one another. It kind of ties into confirmation bias, which is another term that applies here too. So there is that notion. Could the children have been doing something like that, where one child kind of describes something and then truly convinces the others to go along with it and they do so in order to not stand out? It could be, but again, if that were just a simple case and this was the only encounter, that would be more realistic. But remember, I was talking a couple minutes back about other encounters, and here they are. In fact, there was another one in a book called Fairies, Real Encounters with Little People, and in it, one lady stated that over 6 years before the children's own encounter, this lady Marina Fry, who happened to live near that area, she also ran into these little creatures. In fact, it was her and one of her older sisters. They awoke late at night to hear this strange buzzing sound. Remember, previously it was the sound of some kind of bells. In this case, they heard music and bells. And when they looked outside the window, that's when they saw what they described as a little man in a tiny red car, probably very similar to the car described earlier, driving around in circles. He was about 18 inches tall, and he too had the classic white beard and then the pointed hat, just like the other encounters. And then further research notes that there were other encounters in that Wollaton Park too. In fact, one sighting was done by a lady named Mrs. C. George, who saw these very same gnomes playing by some of the park gates nearby some other side of the location. And then in another encounter, a Mrs. Brown also saw these gnomes, and these gnomes also were playing a game with her. It's almost like they were guiding her throughout the park itself, and they were almost rewarding her each time she reached a certain checkpoint, because each time they did so, they physically went up to her and they gave her a feather. How fascinating. I was hoping that she would have stated that she kept these feathers, because then these would have been the feathers as a gift from the gnomes themselves, but I wasn't able to see if that occurred. And then on another encounter, there was a Jean Dixon who stated that she too saw these gnomes running around the park, and they also wanted to show her certain areas too. And so yet another encounter, and this one going back into the early 1900s, she said another person, a lady by the name of Miss Johnson, saw these gnomes spying around certain areas there within the park, almost like they were curious as to their surroundings, and there they were frolicking, but in this case they were dressed as policemen. Isn't that crazy? All these encounters happening within that location, that Wollaton Park, all by different people, all at various points in time, but all tied to the same similar things, same set of gnomes, same cars, same clothing. It's too much to just throw about, to just basically say this did not happen. No. And then there was that most recent one I was mentioning, a 2016 one, and that's where there was these people that were by the railways, apparently located also by that Wollaton Park, and there they saw what they described as these little miniature humanoids, the ones that look like gnomes. And in that case, they were there by the train embankment, like they were kind of tearing down one part of the embankment as this person was passing through that location. I don't know if this person approached them even closer. Probably didn't, considering what they saw, but they still witnessed the set of gnomes doing that little tiny destruction there. That kind of ties into what I was mentioning earlier. For all intents and purposes, these gnomes were just very, very gleeful, very joyful, just maybe a little mischievous at most, but that's about it. Like, they're not dangerous. They're not there to cause harm to any people. If anything, they seem to be excited whenever someone comes across their location. What is interesting to note is that all these encounters seem to just happen to a select few of people, because considering how long this Wollaton Park has been there in existence, and if these gnomes are truly there all the time, then there would be a lot more encounters. But the fact that there's only been a handful of them, like a dozen or so, but still quite a good number to consider. The fact that there's not any more kind of tells me that these things just make their appearance known every now and then. So whether they're there all the time, maybe hidden, invisible, or whether they just pop in and out just during select times, that's very, very interesting to think about. So, but what do you guys think? The mysterious gnomes of Wollaton Park. Those of you that live near that area or have a chance to come across it, you are in luck. I highly recommend it. Go there. Spend a day if you can. Go by those swampy land areas. Go by the embankments, the railways if you can. Try to find that fenced area as well that I just mentioned. If you do, you'll have a good chance of running into these gnomes. How amazing would that be? Whip out your smartphone, whip out your camera, start taking pictures if you can. That way you'll be able to bear witness to this. But if anybody has gone there before, anybody witnessed anything else, please post those comments below. Maybe friends, family members, others that you might know of, anybody that lives there as well. It'd be great to hear your own perspective. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.